If, like this author, most of your time in the Midwest is spent in Michigan, you might came to think that the Buckeyes are a beastly, cultureless people, their native Ohio a fetid hellscape. After all, they managed to set a river on fire a few times, and that takes a measure of doing. Michiganders, basically, are a sound bunch. But as my only memorable experience with Ohio had been the actual fetid hellscape of the state's turnpike, I thought it best to explore the place for myself. The order of the day was a museum-to-museum run from the edge of Lake Erie down to the flats of Dayton. The museums in question: the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force. The Hall of Fame opens at 10 a.m., the Air Force Museum closes at 5 p.m. Just over 200 miles separate them. If I were to see both, and do so in proper style, I'd need a steed to fit the mission. Something fast, glamorous, and a little preposterous, preferably with some semblance of aviation history. The Mercedes-AMG S65 Cabriolet fit the bill nicely, a 4-place convertible with a V12 and $250,000 price tag. Rock and roll never forgets. The Rock Hall, mostly, is a monument to its own desperate desire for importance. Sure, Cleveland's Alan Freed was the first big DJ to spin rock and roll records, but Ohio's best rock and roll came from the margins. Akron's Chrissie Hynde, living as an expat in London, founded the Pretenders. One of America's earliest hardcore bands, Mormes Necros, spawned the vital independent touch-and-go records and contributed Andrew Wendler to the CD staff. Rocket from the Tombs, from Cleveland, split up, resulting in both Pereubu and the Dead Boys. The latter's sonic reducer was sampled by the Beastie Boys. If there was a monument to the late Stiv Bators in the Rock Hall, I missed it, but the Beasties at least got a little kiosk up in the rafters. Honestly, the best thing about the place was that Billy Gibbons's Eliminator coupe was parked in the basement. A perfect execution of the early 1980s full fender style before things got too pastel and smooth. The red 33 Ford still commands respect. I snapped a photo of the coupe and headed for the door. I hadn't seen everything, but I'd seen enough. The second coolest thing in the Rock Hall was the custom Hammer special guitar that Cheap Trick's Rick Nielsen gave to John Lennon not long before the Beatles' death. Nielsen surreptitiously cribbed some measurements from Lennon's Rickenbacker, sent them to Hammer's Dansk, and had him gin up an instrument built to have a similar feel. According to Dansk, the whole thing happened pretty fast. It was always that way with Nielsen. "Oh, and I need it in 10 days, was usually the instruction. The guitar featured DiMarzio pickups wound specially for Hammer, and a thinner neck than a production Hammer special, so that it might play more like Lennon's Rickenbacker. Nielsen came up with a Ricken truss rod cover, making the headstock read Ricken Hammer if one squinted hard enough. Apologetically, car enthusiast Dansk noted, "Sorry, I don't have more interesting details and specific skid pad figures and 0 to 60 times, but I can tell you that the special jailbreaked well and fit into a Lake Hall parking space." Birthplace of aviation, the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force, which we covered extensively in this photo feature, sits on the right field portion of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Its runway services the final flights of aircraft inbound for display. JFK's Air Force One made its last landing here, as did the C-141A Hanoi Taxi, the plane that brought American POWs home from Vietnam, then went on to serve through the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. There were planes in the place I'd waited practically my whole life to see, aircraft like the Bristol Beaufighter and the Focke-Wulf FW-190. The museum is stocked with aircraft that blew my mind as an aviation-obsessed elementary school kid, like the YF-12R, the interim step between the CIA's A-12 Oxcart and the aviation world's equivalent of the Lamborghini Countach, the S-71 Blackbird. The A-12 is basically an SR-71 armed with missiles. At the age of 8, you just knew that the only thing better than a Blackbird was an armed Blackbird. while the Enola Gay resides in the Smithsonian boxcar. The silver plate B-29 that bombed Nagasaki is in some ways more significant. Uranium-238 is tough to extract. Plutonium-239 is an easier isotope to produce in quantity, but it requires a more convoluted, precisely engineered design to go boom. The Manhattan Project's chiefs decided to drop the uranium gun little boy because they knew the bomb's design would work. The plutonium implosion Fat Man was already en route by ship to the 509th Composite Bomb Group's base on Tinian Island when Oppenheimer's gang blew up the similarly constructed gadget outside Alamogordo, New Mexico. If Hiroshima ushered in the atomic age, Nagasaki ensured rapid growth of the nuclear arsenal of any country that could figure out the implosion process required to reach critical mass. Throw in the fact that an implosion bomb serves as the triggering device for a hydrogen fusion device and, fundamentally, Boxcar delivered the weapon that set the stage for 2 decades worth of nuclear deterrent policy, until ICBMs rewrote the Atomic Warfare Rule Book. I wandered onto the recently opened 4th hangar, a building containing hot rod specials like the sole remaining XB-70 Valkyrie, the fastest of all the hypersonic X-15 rocket planes, and the utterly bizarre Avrika, a flying saucer developed by Canadians with the support of the US military. I wandered through some 26,000, the first plane to wear Raymond Loewy's classic Air Force One livery. The Boeing VC-137C was the craft on which Lyndon Baines Johnston was sworn in as its crew prepared to fly Jack Kennedy's body back to Washington, D.C., and even now, with its seats glassed off from the aisles, forever enclosed in an Ohio hangar, the 707 derivative oozes portent. Truer to its fundamental mission as VIP transport than to its hot rod badge, the S65 Cabriolet handles like glass. Which is to say that the AMG treatment does not imbue it with the violent, rip-roaring, and touchy personality of the C63. Removing the roof from the coupe does, however, engender a bit more flexibility than one might expect from Stuttgart's most famous manufacturer of bank vaults. We pulled 0.91 grams on the skid pad, better than the 0.88 grams we saw with an S550 Cabriolet, although it doesn't match the 0.94 grams we got from the Dodge Charger Hellcat. Which, as you may remember, is, somewhere under all the posturing, related to a Mercedes from way back when. After leaving the museum, I found myself trundling down a narrow road under a canopy of trees, following the signs to Huffman Prairie Flying Field. I'd read about the place in David McCulloch's The Wright Brothers. After Orville and Wilbur made history at Kitty Hawk, they returned to Dayton to further refine their flying machines, testing them in a large pasture owned by Torrance Huffman. The field was open and serene, impossibly lush in a way that California only really sees in March. Away from the somber aura that pervades the Air Force Museum, Huffman Prairie holds the same sort of reverent hush that you find at the empty Bonneville Salt Flats, a fundamental quiet baked into its being despite having been shot through by mechanized history. It's where 2 brothers clambered into the sky and made flight a viable thing. The Wrights' work at Kill Devil Hills proved a hypothesis. Huffman Prairie was the spot where flying became something that people actually did.